In just 45 seconds, one of Hollywood's biggest legends went from sitting calmly in a guest chair to being forcibly removed from a late-night set after a brutal, on-air meltdown that left the entire studio in shock. What started as a simple conversation about movies and politics exploded into a screaming match that exposed a side of Clint Eastwood nobody expected to see, turning Stephen Colbert's show into the most talked-about television moment of the year. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to this channel for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals. We bring you the unfiltered truth about what really happens when the cameras are rolling. The tension in the studio last night was thick. From the moment Clint Eastwood walked onto the stage, Stephen Colbert, always the gracious host, stood up to greet the legendary actor and director with a warm smile and enthusiastic applause from the audience. Eastwood, dressed in his signature casual style with a dark jacket and jeans, gave a quick wave to the crowd before settling into the guest chair. His face was stern, more serious than usual, and anyone paying close attention could see something was already bothering him. Colbert started things off friendly enough, asking Eastwood about his latest projects and what he'd been working on lately. The Hollywood icon gave short, clipped answers, barely offering more than a sentence or two. When Colbert tried to joke about Eastwood's famously gruff on-screen persona, suggesting that maybe he wasn't acting at all, the audience laughed, but Eastwood didn't crack a smile. He just stared at Colbert with those piercing eyes that had intimidated countless actors over his decades-long career. "You know, Clint," Colbert said, trying to warm things up, "I've always admired your work. You're a true American icon. But I'm curious about something. You've been pretty vocal about your political views over the years. Remember that whole empty chair thing at the convention?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. They remembered that moment from years ago when Eastwood had spoken to an empty chair representing President Obama at a Republican National Convention. It had become one of the most controversial moments of his career, mocked by critics and defended by supporters. Eastwood's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I remember. What about it?" Colbert leaned forward, his comedy mask slipping slightly to reveal his more serious interviewer side. "Well, it's been over a decade since then, and I think a lot of people are wondering where you stand now. The political landscape has changed so much. Do you have any regrets about that moment?" "Regrets?" Eastwood's voice was low and dangerous. "Why the hell would I have regrets about speaking my mind?" "I'm not saying you should," Colbert replied, keeping his tone measured. "I'm just asking if, with the benefit of hindsight, and seeing how divisive our politics have become, you'd approach things differently." Eastwood shifted in his seat, his body language becoming more aggressive. "You know what, Stephen? I came here because your producers said this would be a conversation about cinema, about my career, about storytelling. I didn't come here to be lectured by some late-night comedian about my political beliefs." The audience went silent. Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "I'm not lecturing anyone, Clint. I'm asking questions. That's what happens on talk shows. Surely you've been on enough of them to know that." "Don't patronize me," Eastwood shot back. "I know exactly what this is. You people in late-night television, you think you're so damn smart. You think you can invite someone on your show, act all friendly, and then ambush them with your political agenda." Colbert's face hardened. The comedian in him was being pushed aside by something else, something more confrontational. "Ambush? Clint, you've been talking about politics for years. You've made it a part of your public persona. Asking you about it isn't an ambush. It's journalism." "Journalism?" Eastwood laughed bitterly. "You call this journalism? You're a puppet, Stephen. You read jokes off a teleprompter that a team of writers created for you. You mock people who don't agree with your worldview. That's not journalism, that's propaganda wrapped in comedy." The studio audience gasped. Some people looked around nervously, unsure if they should applaud, boo, or stay silent. Colbert's staff behind the cameras exchanged worried glances. This was spiraling out of control fast. Colbert took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. "Okay, Clint, I can see you're upset. But calling me a puppet and accusing me of propaganda is pretty extreme. All I did was ask you a question about something you yourself chose to do publicly. You know what your problem is?" Eastwood pointed a finger at Colbert. "You and everyone like you in Hollywood and the media, you think you have all the answers. You think everyone who doesn't agree with you is stupid or evil. You can't just have a conversation without trying to prove how morally superior you are." Colbert's expression changed. The friendly host was gone completely now. His eyes flashed with anger as he leaned back in his chair. "That's rich coming from you. You literally talked to an empty chair to mock a sitting president. You made a joke out of the highest office in the land. And now you're sitting here lecturing me about moral superiority? That president was destroying this country," Eastwood snapped. "Someone had to say something, and someone has to say something now," Colbert fired back. "You want to talk about divisive politics? You want to talk about propaganda? You've spent years supporting politicians who've torn this country apart. You've endorsed people who've spread lies, who've attacked our institutions, who've made Americans hate each other. So don't come on my show and act like you're some victim because I asked you one question about it." The audience erupted in applause. Eastwood's face turned red with rage. He gripped the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles went white. "You don't know what the hell you're talking about," Eastwood said through gritted teeth. "You sit up here in your ivory tower, making millions of dollars to tell jokes and push your agenda. You've never had to work a real day in your life. You've never had to build something from nothing. You just criticize and mock and tear people down." Colbert stood up from behind his desk, his voice rising. "I've never worked a real day in my life. Are you kidding me? I've been working in comedy and entertainment for decades. I've built my career through hard work and talent. And yeah, I criticize people when they deserve it. That's my job. Just like your job used to be making great movies before you decided to become a political activist. At least I stand for something," Eastwood shouted, jumping to his feet. The two men now faced each other across the desk, both visibly furious. "At least I have principles. You just say whatever your network tells you to say. You attack whoever they tell you to attack. You're a coward hiding behind jokes." The studio was in chaos now. The audience didn't know whether to cheer, boo, or sit in stunned silence. Camera operators kept filming, knowing this was television gold even as it spiraled into disaster. Producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. Colbert's voice was shaking with anger now. "Get out! Seriously, Clint, get the hell out of my studio." "I'm not going anywhere until I've had my say," Eastwood shot back. "You wanted to talk politics? Let's talk politics. Let's talk about how people like you have divided this country more than anyone. Let's talk about how you mock half the country every single night, making them feel like they're stupid for believing what they believe." "I mock people who deserve to be mocked," Colbert yelled. "I mock hypocrites and liars, and people who use their fame to spread dangerous ideas. And right now, I'm looking at someone who fits that description perfectly." Eastwood took a step toward the desk. "You want to call me dangerous? You're the one with a platform reaching millions of people every night. You're the one telling them what to think, how to vote, who to hate. At least I'm honest about my beliefs. You hide behind comedy so you can say whatever you want without consequences." "Without consequences?" Colbert's laugh was harsh and bitter. "I've been attacked, threatened, boycotted, and dragged through the mud for speaking my mind. Don't talk to me about consequences when you've been protected by your legend status for decades. Nobody criticizes Clint Eastwood too harshly because everyone's afraid of tarnishing a Hollywood icon. That's bullshit and you know it," Eastwood roared. "I've been criticized plenty. The difference is, I don't whine about it. I don't play the victim. I stand by what I say and what I do." Colbert walked around his desk now, moving closer to Eastwood. The two men were only a few feet apart, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. "You want to talk about standing by what you say? Fine. Stand by the empty chair thing. Stand by every divisive, inflammatory thing you've supported. But don't come on my show and act offended when someone asks you about it." "I'm offended by your hypocrisy," Eastwood said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm offended by the fact that you think you're better than everyone else. I'm offended by the fact that you use comedy as a weapon and then act shocked when people fight back." "Then maybe you shouldn't have come here," Colbert said coldly. "Maybe you should have stayed home and talked to another empty chair. At least that way you wouldn't have to deal with someone actually challenging you." That was it. That was the line that couldn't be uncrossed. Eastwood's face contorted with rage. "You arrogant son of a bitch. You think you're so clever with your little jokes. You think you're untouchable up here in your studio, with your audience of sheep who applaud everything you say." The audience booed now, loudly. But Eastwood ignored them completely, focused entirely on Colbert. "These sheep, as you call them, are people," Colbert said, his voice icy. "They're Americans who come here to laugh and maybe learn something. They're not your enemy just because they don't agree with you. They're your echo chamber," Eastwood spat. "They believe whatever you tell them to believe. That's not thinking for yourself. That's being programmed." Colbert shook his head in disgust. "You know what, Clint? I tried to have a civil conversation with you. I really did. But you came here with an agenda. You came here looking for a fight. And you know why? Because deep down, you know that history isn't going to be kind to some of the choices you've made. You know that talking to that empty chair is going to be a punchline forever. You know that your political legacy is going to overshadow your artistic one. And that kills you. History will remember me for my films," Eastwood said. But there was a crack in his voice now, a hint of uncertainty. "I've created art that will last forever. What will you be remembered for? Jokes that were stale the next morning? Maybe," Colbert admitted. "But at least I won't be remembered for being a bitter old man who couldn't handle being asked a simple question." That was the breaking point. Eastwood's face went purple with rage. "Screw you, Stephen. Screw you and your show and your network and everyone who thinks like you." "Then leave," Colbert said, pointing toward the exit. "Leave my show. Walk out that door. Because I'm done with this conversation, and I'm done with you." "You can't kick me off your show," Eastwood said. But he was already backing toward the edge of the stage. "Watch me," Colbert replied. Security. 2 large security guards appeared from the wings, moving quickly toward Eastwood. The legendary actor looked at them, then back at Colbert, his expression a mixture of rage and humiliation. "This is what you've become," Eastwood said, his voice shaking. "This is what happens when you can't win an argument. You silence people. You throw them out. You're everything that's wrong with this country." "Get him out of here," Colbert ordered, and the security guards moved closer. Eastwood held up his hands. "Don't touch me. I'm leaving on my own." But as he turned to go, he couldn't resist one final shot. "You're a disgrace, Stephen. A disgrace to comedy, to journalism, to everything. I hope you're proud of yourself." "I am," Colbert said simply. "I'm proud that I asked tough questions. I'm proud that I didn't back down. And I'm proud that I run a show where people are held accountable for what they say and do." Eastwood laughed bitterly. "Accountable? You wouldn't know accountability if it bit you in the ass. You hide behind your desk and your jokes and your applause signs. You've never had to face real consequences in your entire privileged life. And you've never had to face the fact that you're not always right," Colbert countered. "That's your problem, Clint. You've been a legend for so long that you think you can't be questioned. You think you can say whatever you want and everyone will just nod and agree because you're Clint Eastwood. Well, guess what? Those days are over." "My days are over?" Eastwood's laugh was harsh. "Kid, I've been making movies since before you were born. I've won Oscars. I've created masterpieces. What have you done besides read jokes off a screen?" "I've created a space where people can laugh and think at the same time," Colbert said. "I've challenged power. I've spoken truth to authority. I've done it for years, and I'll keep doing it long after everyone forgets about this moment." "Nobody's going to forget this," Eastwood said darkly. "This is going to follow you forever. Everyone's going to see how you treated a guest on your show, how you ambushed him, attacked him, and then threw him out when he stood up for himself. They'll see a host who refused to let a guest bully him," Colbert replied. "They'll see someone who asked fair questions and got attacked for it. They'll see you losing your cool because you couldn't handle a little pushback." Eastwood was at the edge of the stage now, the security guards flanking him. His face was still red, his hands still shaking with anger. "You're making a big mistake, Stephen, a really big mistake." "The only mistake I made was inviting you here in the first place," Colbert said. "Now get out." For a long moment, Eastwood just stared at him, his legendary gaze trying to intimidate one last time. But Colbert didn't flinch. He stood his ground, arms crossed, waiting. Finally, Eastwood turned and walked off the stage, the security guards following close behind. The audience erupted in a mixture of applause and shocked gasps. Some people were cheering, others were booing, and many just sat there with their mouths open, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Colbert stood there for a moment, breathing hard, his professional composure completely shattered. His hands were shaking slightly as he ran them through his hair. The camera stayed on him as he walked back to his desk, trying to collect himself. But Eastwood wasn't quite done. From backstage, his voice echoed through the studio. "You're a fraud, Colbert. A fraud and a coward. You can't handle anyone who disagrees with you. You're everything wrong with the media." The audience fell silent again, everyone straining to hear. Colbert grabbed the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. "Someone get him out of the building," Colbert said quietly into his microphone. Right now. More security appeared, and the sounds of a struggle could be heard backstage. Eastwood was shouting, his words barely coherent now, just raw anger and frustration pouring out. "Don't put your hands on me. I said don't touch me. I'm leaving, goddammit." The studio doors slammed open and then shut. Finally, there was silence. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or not. They sat frozen, watching Colbert, waiting to see what would happen next. Colbert looked directly into the camera, his face still flushed with anger and adrenaline. "Well, folks, that was not how I planned tonight's show to go. I invited Clint Eastwood here for what I hoped would be an interesting conversation about his incredible career. Instead, we got that." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Look, I have tremendous respect for Clint Eastwood's work as a filmmaker. He's made some of the greatest movies in American cinema. But respect for someone's art doesn't mean we can't ask them tough questions about their public statements and actions. That's not an ambush. That's journalism. That's accountability." The audience applauded, gaining confidence now. "I asked him one question," Colbert continued, his voice rising. "One question about something he chose to do publicly, at a major political event. And his response was to attack me, attack this show, attack all of you, and then storm out when he couldn't bully his way through the conversation." More applause, louder now. "Here's the thing," Colbert said, leaning on his desk. "When you're a public figure, especially one with Clint Eastwood's platform and influence, you don't get to just say and do whatever you want without being asked about it. You don't get to make political statements and then act offended when someone brings them up. That's not how it works." The applause was deafening now. The audience was firmly on Colbert's side, energized by his passion and conviction. But even as they cheered, even as Colbert tried to regain control of his show, the damage was done. The confrontation had been brutal, personal, and completely unscripted. Two powerful men in entertainment had clashed in the most public way possible, and there was no taking it back. Backstage, Eastwood was being escorted out of the building by security. Witnesses would later report that he was still muttering angrily, still convinced that he'd been wronged, still refusing to accept any responsibility for how the interview had exploded. As he reached his car in the parking lot, photographers who had somehow gotten wind of the chaos were already there, snapping pictures. Eastwood shoved past them, climbing into his vehicle without a word. His face in those photos would tell the story better than any words could. A legend humiliated, an icon diminished, a proud man brought low by his own anger and stubbornness. He slammed the car door and drove away into the night, leaving behind a trail of controversy that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. The viral moment had been captured, the damage had been done, and Hollywood would be talking about nothing else for the foreseeable future. Back in the studio, Colbert was trying to continue with his show, but everyone could see the toll the confrontation had taken. His usual smooth delivery was gone, replaced by visible tension and barely contained emotion. His jokes fell flat. His interviews with the remaining guests were perfunctory and stiff. The energy in the studio had changed completely. What was supposed to be a fun night of entertainment had become something else entirely. A battlefield, a courtroom, a public execution. And everyone who had witnessed it knew they'd just seen something unprecedented. As the show finally limped to its conclusion and the camera stopped rolling, Colbert sat alone at his desk for a long moment, staring at the empty chair where Eastwood had been sitting just minutes before. The crew quietly packed up around him, nobody quite sure what to say. One of the producers approached cautiously. "Stephen, are you okay?" Colbert looked up, his expression unreadable. That was insane. That was absolutely insane. It was, the producer agreed. But you stood your ground. You didn't back down. I didn't have a choice, Colbert said quietly. He came in hot. He was looking for a fight from the beginning. I just gave him one. The producer nodded. The clip is already going viral. Social media is exploding. This is going to be everywhere by morning. Colbert stood up slowly, suddenly looking exhausted. Of course it is. Of course it is. He walked off the set without another word, leaving his staff to deal with the aftermath. In his dressing room, he sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. The adrenaline was wearing off now, replaced by the crushing weight of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Eastwood was speeding down the freeway, his phone ringing non-stop with calls from his agent, his publicist, his family. He ignored them all, focused only on driving, on getting away from that studio and that show and that smug comedian who had dared to challenge him. In his mind, he replayed the confrontation over and over, each time finding new things he should have said, new ways he could have won the argument. But deep down, in a place he refused to acknowledge, he knew the truth. He had lost control. He had let his anger get the better of him. He had turned what could have been a dignified disagreement into a spectacle. And Hollywood doesn't forgive spectacles. Not from legends. Not from anyone. The viral clip would be everywhere within hours. News outlets would dissect every word, every gesture, every moment of the confrontation. Social media would take sides, with camps forming immediately. Team Colbert versus Team Eastwood. Think pieces would be written. Hot takes would fly. The entertainment world would be consumed by the drama. But none of that mattered in this moment. In this moment, there was just a lonely car speeding through the night, carrying a proud man who had just experienced one of the most humiliating moments of his legendary career, and a studio full of shocked crew members trying to process what they had just witnessed. The empty chair where Eastwood had been sitting remained on the set, a silent reminder of the chaos that had erupted. And somewhere in the building, Colbert sat in his dressing room, wondering if he had done the right thing, if standing his ground had been worth the spectacle, if this moment would define his career the way the empty chair moment had defined Eastwood's political legacy. Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Nobody who had been in that studio tonight would ever forget what they had seen. The night Clint Eastwood exploded on live television. The night a legend fell apart. The night that changed everything.